Let's begin. Hi, everybody. My name is Randy Solomon, and I'm the Executive Director of Sustainable Jersey at the Sustainability Institute at the College of New Jersey. Welcome back to the Climate Summit. This is the start of something very special. We're here not just to learn about climate change, but we are here to work together to actually do something about it. And that this summit is the kickoff to a contest where we are going to ask you and help you and celebrate your success as you go into your communities and your schools and you actually do projects to make a difference. To work together, which is what this is about, we first want to get to know who we are and who's here. So to start off, I'd like to ask that in the chat box, people go ahead and share who they are. So tell us what school you're from, if you're working with a particular teacher or class, or if you're a teacher, and let's just get a sense of who all is here. So go ahead and put that into the chat box right now. Who wants to be first? Environmental science in New Jersey. Great. Hi, CJ from Miss Gagliotti's class. Who else do we have? From Olson Middle School? Hi, Carissa. What other school districts do we have? We want to see where folks are from the state as well. Performing Arts Academy, Mrs. Mead's SAVE Club. Wonder what SAVE stands for at WMS. Williamstown Middle School SAVE Club. Oh, great. So now I know what WMS is. A number of people from the SAVE Club. Great, welcome. A lot from the SAVE Club and Performing Arts Academy. That's great. So next we want to know a little bit about how you're joining us today. So we're going to put out a poll and we ask everyone, I think everyone here knows how to use the questions. So popping up right here, there's a poll, everyone should see it. And if you could just real quick pop in, how are you joining us today? And the second question is, did you participate in the opening session on Tuesday? Because that'll help us understand what we need to cover today versus what you might already know. And so we're going to give that another maybe 5 seconds. If everyone could just quickly get in your votes, and then we'll share the results. Great, and why don't we close the poll and show the results. Fantastic, so we have 3 individual teachers, 11 individual students, and then 8 that are viewing as part of a large group. That's great. And it looks like about 2 to 1, you did not participate in the opening session on Tuesday. And that's fine. All these sessions have been recorded, and so you can go back and check them out anytime you want. And so there is going to be a lot of learning that happens from session to session. You can join any one session you want, or you can go back and review them all, which we recommend, but either way you do it is fine. So thanks, everybody. You'll see that each of these sessions do build on each other, providing more detail, and they're all addressing 3 overarching themes that we're working towards. One is, why is climate change happening? The second is, how is climate change going to impact us and impact future generations? And future generations includes you, if you're us. And I think most importantly, what can we do to make it better? What can we actually do on the ground, in our schools, in our towns, in our houses, to make a difference, to stop climate change and to stop these negative consequences that we're all hearing about that could happen. Today's session is about climate and sustainability goals for New Jersey. And we're happy to have speakers from the state and also from South Jersey and from the regional area to share with you more about the impacts of climate change in New Jersey and in the region, and also some of the efforts that they're implementing to try to address climate change and address these impacts. We hope that this is going to be an interactive discussion. So let's real quick review how we can make it interactive. I think most of you are familiar with this, but if we could see the slide. And hopefully it's showing. Is it showing? Am I supposed to be showing it? Okay. So give me 1 second. So you can see here we've got the chat box. And for the chat box, that's if we ask you a question, or if you just want to make a comment about something that one of the speakers are saying, go ahead and just put it right into the chat. If you're asked to raise your hand to respond to a question, so if I say, quick show of hands, how many people have done this or done that, then you click that raise hand button. And then if you've got questions for the presenters that you want us to ask, like a serious question, you've thought it out, write it into that question and answer feature. And then we'll get to it. We'll either type in the answer or we'll bring it up to the speakers and they'll answer it. And you can also like a question that someone else put in there, and that will bump it up on the priority list. So so at the end of today's session, when you go to click out of the webinar, there'll be a short survey that's going to pop up in your browser. Please take a few minutes to respond. It's really helpful to us. And this is a pilot project that's just starting in South Jersey, and we hope to expand it to the rest of the state. And so your feedback is really helpful to us as we think about, should we expand it to the rest of the state, and how can we make it better in the future? So let's get started. Our first speaker is Helaine Barr, and she is a research scientist in the climate change program at the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection. I don't know how many people that you know that have the title research scientist on climate change. That's pretty cool. And so she works, again, for the state Department of Environmental Protection. And I would like to turn it over to Helaine to do her presentation.
Hi, everybody. I am super happy to be here. Is everybody seeing my screen? Yeah, big thumbs up.
Yep, thumbs up.
All right, let me just figure out something real quick. Okay. Awesome. So I'm super happy to be here. Hi, my name is Colleen. I am a research scientist, which sounds fancier than it probably really is. And I work in climate change and clean energy, and my job is really helping the state to develop policies to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And so one of the things I know Randy and Renee had asked me to do was to talk a little bit about how I got here. And so this probably sounds silly and crazy, but I've known since I was in 4th grade that I wanted to work in the environmental field. That year, a few things happened. I won a recycling poster contest, which probably sounds silly again, but it's true. And I never really won anything. And I was like, wow, maybe I am good at something. And I also did a biography on Rachel Carson. A show of hands, how many people have heard of Rachel Carson? Anybody? Ooh, maybe one person, it looks like. That's cool. So yeah, she's actually awesome, and you guys should all check her out. She is a super famous marine biologist, conservationist, woman scientist, and she wrote a super famous book called Silent Spring. And it really helped to get a lot of pesticides that were hurting wildlife banned in the United States. So it really was inspiring to me, and hearing about that gave me the interest to start pursuing more environmental things. And I just kept on with a lifelong passion of mine. And really, you guys think about careers, and there's going to be a ton of green jobs out there. If this is something that interests you, that you have passion about, I say go for it, because when you love your work, it doesn't feel like work. So I'm really blessed that way. Okay. So what am I going to talk about? I'm going to talk a little bit about the impacts of climate change in New Jersey, and talk a bit about New Jersey's plan to reduce greenhouse gases and some ways that you can get involved at the state level to help influence policy in the direction of things. I think the most important thing is, right, like we're planning your future in a lot of ways. So the more that you can get involved today and, be part of the discussion, the better your future will be too. Quick show of hands again. How many people think that they have already experienced impacts of climate change? Let me see if I can tell. Well, yeah, at least Oh, it's going up, 10 people. That's great, 13, 14, 15. Yeah, everybody's hands should be raised. We are already experiencing the impacts of climate change in New Jersey. So a few of them that I'll walk through is temperature, right? New Jersey is actually warming faster than the rest of the whole Northeast region and the world. Since the late 1800s, New Jersey's temperature on average has risen about 3.5 degrees. You can see this map here, I've circled where I think most of you guys are participating from. The dark blue is sort of the coastal areas of New Jersey, Division 3, and the light yellow is the more southern areas of New Jersey. And as you can see, even here, we have even more intense temperature increases. Division 3 along the coast is experiencing a 4-degree increase on average, while the south is about 3.5. And this is actually, the greatest increases are shown typically in the winter. So we're having warmer Decembers and January and Februarys. So why does this matter? You know, what is the problem with that? Sure, it's a couple degrees warmer. Maybe you don't like snow. Maybe you don't think this is a problem. Well, when our temperature increases, it actually has a lot of other impacts on our life. It can impact our agricultural production, which will mean that there'll be potentially less food on the table, or it'll make food more expensive. It can increase how much energy consumption we need. So we'd be potentially burning more fossil fuels to keep our houses cooler. You've probably heard of some of the rolling blackouts that have happened in California. As it gets hotter in New Jersey, we might have to experience things like that as well. Additionally, with higher temperatures come higher health impacts, such as heat stress, which can definitely lead to deaths and more illness in more vulnerable communities, especially those that can't afford air conditioning. And there'll also be impacts on our natural areas and wildlife. So you might be thinking again, right, a few degrees, well, that's not a big deal. But some really smart people have done some modeling to predict future potential temperatures in New Jersey based on different greenhouse gas scenarios. So that dark blue line that you see is actually higher emission scenarios. So that assumes that we stay on the same and current rate of releasing greenhouse gases today into the future. And that dark green line shows, okay, what happens if we actually lower our greenhouse gas emission rates? And what does that mean for our future? And you can see even under a low emission scenario, our annual temperatures will routinely be as warm as the warmest years ever documented in New Jersey. And by the middle of the 21st century, so around 2050, 70% of the summers in the Northeast will be hotter than the warmest summer to date. So this is all very real impacts that will be affecting us into the future. You know, in 2050, you guys will probably be in your 40s. You'll be like me. So not only are we getting warmer in New Jersey, we're also getting wetter. Over the last 10 years, we've had about an 8% increase in precipitation. And we're expecting that that will go upwards closer to 11% increase by 2050. Again, you might be thinking, well, it's just a few raindrops. Why does that matter? I'll get my umbrella, I'll put on my rain boots. It's not a big deal. Well, it really becomes an issue of public safety, right? Unfortunately, the infrastructure in our state is not designed to deal with that heavier rainfall. We'll have a higher frequency of flooding that comes along with this annual precipitation. Additionally, when we have all that warmer weather, it's going to make our storms a lot more intense. And that means that we'll have warmer oceans, warmer air, so there'll be stronger storms and a greater likelihood of extreme events. Things like Hurricane Sandy might not become once in a lifetime event at all. Between 1980 and 2018, New Jersey has sustained over 42 extreme weather events that causes nationwide over $1 billion in losses. So these are really very real problems that we'll be anticipating in the future. Outside of weather and rain, right, we're also going to be experiencing a rising sea level here in New Jersey. So sea levels in New Jersey are increasing at a greater rate than other parts of the world. And this is really attributed to two things. One, the land along the coast of New Jersey is sinking. And two, our sea levels are actually rising. And we're already experiencing this. By show of hands, has anybody ever been to Atlantic City or Cape May here? I have a feeling that probably almost everyone has. Oh yeah. I mean, I love to vacation at the Jersey Shore. I go every year with my family. Right, so these areas are actually already experiencing sea level rise. As you can see, every year about a 4 millimeter increase since the beginning of the 20th century. And if we look at this table, these are some predictions going into the future about what sea level rise might be like. By 2050, there's a 50% chance that we might have a 1.5 foot increase in sea levels. And by 2100, maybe when you're around 90 years old, that could be upwards of 3 feet. So why does this matter, right? Well, this will mean that a lot of our coastal lands and wetlands are inundated, and that they might experience what we call sunny day flooding, meaning that there'll be flooding even when there hasn't been a rain event. And so those communities will be greatly impacted and might not be what they are today. We might not be able to enjoy them in vacation there. So it's not just about the impacts on land, there's also going to be impacts underwater. So ocean acidification is sometimes called like the evil twin of climate change. One of the things that our oceans do is they absorb a great amount of carbon dioxide for us. But in doing so, and as we have more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, they absorb more of that, and that means that our oceans become more acidic. And this can be really dangerous to some of the shellfish and marine life in our waters. And it can be hard for them to adapt to this changing pH. And a lot of times the shells of marine animals are already dissolving in that acidic water, and our corals are as well. If you look at a map of the United States and the greatest areas that will be impacted, New Jersey actually ranks second in the US in terms of economic dependence on shellfish. We have a pretty big economy here in New Jersey around that, especially all of our coastal towns, our fisheries. This provides a lot of jobs in New Jersey. So yeah, this is an area again where we're going to be seeing impacts. We might not be able to have those types of jobs and those, industry around that in New Jersey. And the last big impact I'm going to talk about, and I know some of the other speakers today are going to talk about some of the other more natural impacts. So I'm going to stop with this one, is air quality. So climate change is also going to affect our human health by making our air less healthy to breathe. In New Jersey, we already face a burden of air pollution. I pulled out these two maps that NJDEP we have on our website under air quality. It's called the Community Corner, and you can check this out. All these blue dots show all the major facilities that release air pollution in New Jersey. And then I zoomed in onto the Atlantic City region, and you can zoom in and also see the minor sources, which means they don't produce as much pollution, but they do have to still get a permit for what they produce. So when we look at all this, and then we think about some of the air quality issues in New Jersey, we already really struggle with something called ground level ozone. And this is created when oxides of nitrogen and volatile organic compounds mix with sunlight. And so those types of air pollutants are released from cars, from our power plants, our industrial boilers, and they react in the presence of sunlight, and they create ozone, which can be really bad for our health. It can lead to asthma, emphysema, increased deaths. So as we have a greater increase in temperatures in New Jersey, we have a greater burden of pollution that we'll have to face. So that was kind of a bummer, right? You're probably like, wow, the state knows all this stuff. Well, what's the plan? Like, we can't let all of this happen. And that's absolutely true. And luckily, the state has some really ambitious greenhouse gas goals. The legislature passed 2 goals for the state. The first goal set for 2020 was to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And as you can see, as of our last greenhouse gas inventory in 2018, I'm happy to say we met it. We've reduced our emissions actually about 20% more than we needed to achieve that goal. Our second goal is quite a bit more ambitious though. And that's what we refer to as the 2050 goal, or the 80 by 50 goal. And this goal for the state is to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050. And as you can see, we've got a long way to go and quite a steep curve to bend here to make it there. So as a quick poll that I thought it would be interesting to see, what do you guys think is the #1 source of greenhouse gases in New Jersey? So as a quick refresher, right, greenhouse gases come from the combustion of fossil fuels like coal, oil, and natural gas. Think about all the ways that you might use those fuels in your life. They can also come from agriculture as well. I see that on there. So it's not only just the combustion of fossil fuels, but some of them are sort of naturally occurring as well. not sure. You guys tell me when the poll's done.
I think that's enough time, probably.
Okay.
All right, everyone get your final answers in.
Oh, okay.
All right, let's
And
bring
then
it
does it show me the results? Ooh.
Yeah.
Oh, you guys are smart. You guys got the right answer. Wow. I didn't expect that, to be honest. So it is actually transportation. You guys should give yourselves like a pat on the back. That's awesome. So in New Jersey, transportation is the #1 greenhouse gas overall in our state emissions profile. So, so that means all the cars that we drive, all the different ways that we get around town, all the gasoline we put on our cars, right? Pollution coming from those areas. The second largest one is from buildings, from the residential and commercial sector. So the way that we heat and cool our homes, the way that we run our appliances, all relies on natural gas, heating oil, those kind of things. And then the third largest sector is electric generation. So that's how we make the energy to power our homes. So when we like plug something in, that it works. And those are really the top 3 sources in New Jersey. So what's the plan? How are we going to cut all of these sources to get to our 2050 goal? So achieving this goal is really going to require a fundamental transformation in the way that we generate and consume energy. Each one of us as individuals are going to need a commitment to do things differently and to reduce our carbon footprints. And ultimately, there are really 3 critical strategies that we're going to need to take. One, we're going to have to replace all fossil fuel cars with electric vehicles, right? 2, we're going to have to convert all of the space and water heating in our buildings to electricity. So we're going to have to electrify our building sector. And then 3, which is really the linchpin of the thing, we're going to have clean energy, right, being produced. Because if we try to electrify vehicles and buildings, but we don't actually have clean energy being generated, then we're just shifting emissions away from one sector and putting it into the electric generation sector. So New Jersey is really needing to build out an immense amount of renewable energy over the next 30 years to hit our goals and to transition and adopt all these new technologies in the way that we drive and power our buildings. So what has the state been doing? So state actions to reduce greenhouse gases, we've released 2 major reports or plans that are helping to drive the state's vision and align policies to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. There's the Global Warming Response Act 80 by 50 report and the Energy Master Plan, and they really work in tandems to lay out these pathways and the changes that need to be made to achieve our goals. Additionally, the state is also pursuing a lot of different policies to really get at the larger, broader, overarching 3 things that need to happen, right? So we are installing a ton of renewable energy and developing policies and different financing models to help get more solar and offshore wind built. We have energy efficiency targets, so we're trying to cut the amount of energy that we as a state are using so that we are less reliant on it. We are focusing on electric vehicles, trying to get more people to adopt them and have more charging throughout the state. And I believe that all of these things are things you're going to hear about later on in the summit, so I'm not going to touch on them in any depth. Just know that those are really like some of the key things that we as a state are doing. We also rejoined the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which is a cap and trade program. So any fossil fuel electric generating units are then sort of taxed, and that money comes back to the state to invest in climate mitigation actions. And last but not least, where I work, the Department of Environmental Protection is actually going through a massive regulatory reform. And we're looking at all of our rules and regulations, and we're updating them to better take into account how can we reduce greenhouse gases and how can we become more resilient against climate change. So some of the new rules that will be coming out in the next year look at, improving greenhouse gas monitoring and reporting throughout the state to make sure that we have more accurate data to really understand where our emissions are coming from. Looking at transportation rules, how can we help drive a decarbonization of our cars and our vehicles? Looking at stationary sources, so those are like those major point sources on that map. How can we help them to reduce their emissions? And then land use rules as well. So I'm going to end on this. How can you get involved? As I said before, this is your future, and having your voice in the conversation today will only lead to better outcomes in the future. One of the things that's great about the state is we have to go through a lot of stakeholder participation, and we want to hear your voice. And you'd be surprised. I mean, these are really big, important policies that are going to be impacting millions of New Jerseyans, and we only ever get a handful of people that come to our meetings in reality. So, you know, it would be awesome to have more students be more vocal and involved in those meetings. So I would suggest that you visit the NJPAC website that I have up here, and this will tell you when there's going to be stakeholder meetings and comment times for these different rules that are going to happen. You can also visit the DEP calendar to learn about other public meetings. And then one shameless plug, on April 8th, we're going to be having a webinar that just talks largely about ways to get a carbon neutral New Jersey off the ground. So with that, I will end my slideshow.
Great. Thank you so much, Helaine. And so I'm going to ask people to put some more questions in, and while we wait to see if we get any more, I just wanted to note a couple things. I'm going to remind people that this session is the one where we're talking about the impacts of climate change. It's not one of the sessions where we're talking about the solutions. And there are other sessions where we're going to go into the solutions. And Helaine works for the state, so they make the laws and they implement the laws. And so they do things like would say, like, everyone has to have electric cars, or we're going to give people extra money to make electric cars cheaper. So even if we don't force you to buy electric cars, we make it the easiest and the cheapest thing for people to do. But there's also a whole category of stuff, again, that the state can't do, that we have to do in our lives and in our schools and in our communities. And we're going to be really focusing down on those things. Okay, so to the questions. So the first one, Helaine, is there any way to get rid of the bad gases? So, and I guess we could break that into two questions, right? One is there any way to stop them from being emitted, which is getting into the solutions question again. So I would say give a little overview on that, but don't go too far. And then the other one is, once they're in the air, is there anything that we can do to get them out?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a ton of solutions, ways that we can move away from using so much fossil fuel, and they can be as simple as unplugging your devices when you're done using them, because they still use electricity, and then the electricity that's made in New Jersey, you know, comes from different fossil fuel sources at times. Or it can be, you know, looking at instead of driving a car or asking your mom or dad to, you know, take you to a friend's house, maybe considering riding your bike, right? Because that's, you're not going to be releasing any greenhouse gases that way.
Yeah.
In terms of once they're already released and in the air, there's something known as carbon capture and sequestration. This is still really sort of new technology, but there are some plants that are out there that are like sort of sucking the carbon out of the air and storing it underground or using it in other materials. But that's not really like at scale. So when I say that, it means it's not enough of that isn't happening that it's actually making an impact on the global warming that's happening in the world. So.
Sounds good. Thank you. Yeah, and I'll also note that, you know, these are things that people can do in their homes. Like, so you can plant a tree if you happen to live in a place where, you know, you can do that, and that can make a difference. Or you could actually choose, you know, with your family or your school to buy green energy that comes from solar power or windmills, wind turbines. Or you can actually get solar panels installed on your school or in your house. And so there's actually a lot that you can do, and we'll review a lot of that as we go forward. So that's great. Thank you so much, Helaine. And we're going to move on to the next speaker. And the next speaker is Joel Mott, and he is the principal public programs specialist for the New Jersey Pinelands Commission, which is like the government agency that's in charge of like the Pine Barrens and like the specific parts of the state that are in the Pine Barrens. And so I would like to turn it over to Joel and ask him to make his presentation.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to talk with you about the Pinelands and the challenges that are you know, potentially there with climate change. I'll bring up my presentation now. Okay, like I said before, good afternoon. I work for the New Jersey Pinelands Commission. It really falls in my job to educate and inform people about the Pinelands, which is something that I enjoy doing. I was born and raised down here in southern New Jersey. And, you know, I'm gonna kind of try to give you the low perspective, you know, what are we seeing in the Pinelands and what are these challenges related to climate change? And just to start, real quick, you think about the Pinelands. What are the Pinelands? Well, we know the numbers is about 22% of the state. It's primarily forested. There's a lot of water, a lot of recreational opportunities, lots of places to go camping and hiking, and it's a really important resource for those reasons. But also, it's got a pretty unique ecosystem. There's a lot of really special plants, really special animals. I could spend all day talking about this stuff, but then keep in mind another good thing about the Pinelands. If you look at the whole kind of eastern seaboard, maybe from say Boston all the way down to say Richmond, Virginia, right along the coast, the largest undeveloped area is by far the New Jersey Pinelands. And there's, we heard a little bit about carbon sequestration before, and all this open space in the Pinelands, all the trees, all the wetlands that are here are great to help absorb some of that carbon. So it's really important. So as we move on, just put things in perspective. What are the Pinelands? Here's South Jersey. The area primarily outlined in green is known as the Pinelands National Reserve. That was created in 1978 by the federal government, and really kind of sets the table for further protection of the Pinelands. The Pinelands a lot of times is referred to as the Pine Barrens. That's more the traditional name. I was fortunate to graduate from Pinelands Regional High School. I work at the Pinelands Commission, so Pinelands really rolls off my tongue. But when I think about it in a historical context, I do tend to go back to Pine Barrens. A little bit further, in 1979, the state kind of takes the advice of the federal government, and they create what is called the Pinelands Protection Act. And that specifically creates the New Jersey Pinelands Commission. That's who I work for today. And then they kind of give the commission kind of a mission to write a plan. And the commission writes called a Comprehensive Management Plan, which is actually signed January 14th in 1981. So about 40 years ago, this kind of framework to kind of preserve multiple resources, but also the economy, kind of the culture on multiple levels to kind of preserve the Pinelands really goes into place about 40 years ago. Here's a satellite overview of the Pinelands. And one of the things that stands right out to me right away is all the green and all the blue. The Pinelands is 80% upland forest, wetlands, and water. And that's a combination of swamps and things, but that 80% is a pretty large number. And so right off the bat, that kind of drops the 20%, which is left over, to where primarily most of the people live in the Pinelands area. All that forest, as we said, is great for capturing some of that carbon and all those resources and opportunities it affords us. A fancy word for that might be the ecosystem services provided by the area. Kind of on that water theme, you think about it, water everywhere is probably the theme of almost every Pinelands program I do. There's a lot of water on the surface, but importantly, there's a lot of water below the surface. The Pinelands is primarily very sandy. If you guys are all familiar from Southern New Jersey, you've probably driven through the area. You're familiar with what we call sugar sand. Well, that sugar sand and then layers of gravel really is able to collect water. We think under the Pinelands, there's an aquifer. It's called the Kirkwood-Cohansey Aquifer. The sand is able to hold up to 17.7 trillion gallons of water. That's enough water to cover the whole entire state in about 10 foot of water. And we think it's probably equal to nearly half the water consumed each year in the United States. Very important for us, people that live in Southern New Jersey, all the plants, all the animals, aquifer is the region's lifeblood. Probably over 1.5 million people get water from the Kirkwood-Cohansey and the other water resources or other aquifers in Southern New Jersey. Why does it need to be so undeveloped? The idea is that when it rains, that water can percolate through the surface, through the undeveloped areas, down into these layers of sand, which is the aquifer. I talked a little bit before about the animals and the plants. They're very unique to the Pinelands. The Pinelands has a very unique ecosystem. Things tend to be very acidic. The pH is a lot lower in a lot of Pinelands places. So we get special plants, special animals. Roughly 500 animals are known to occur in the Pinelands, and 43 are designated or classified as threatened and endangered. Even on a bigger scale, There's about 850 plants that live in the Pinelands or are native to the Pinelands, and around 92 of them are threatened or endangered. Depending on different botanists, have a lot of different answers there. But there's a lot of really cool, unique, special to the Pinelands habitats and resources. Some of this is going to sound familiar. Certainly some of the things that we're seeing in the state, we're also seeing specifically in the Pinelands area regarding, what is climate change going to do? What are our assumptions? Certainly rising temperatures. What we've seen in the Pinelands is that's leading to hotter and drier day-to-day temperatures. In the winter, this has certainly played through the last couple of years. The winters are warmer, but they also seem to be wetter. And another consequence of that is when it's cold, it's not as cold for as long. So, it's not down around 0 or 10 for 2 weeks in a row. It only gets cold and then kind of comes back up around freezing. Definitely has an effect on a lot of the vegetation and, of course, some of the animals. Increasing weather variability. We've, in the last few years, we've had, Irene, we've had Sandy, we've had a number of storms. All predictions are that these storms are going to become more extreme, and that's going to lead to definitely more flooding, more drought, and just higher levels of heat. And also all associated with all this is also the idea of raising sea level rise, and that's going to have some pretty specific impacts to South Jersey, where people live. There may be some things that involve the aquifer, and we'll see that as we go through. Real specific to these potential impacts right away with the heat, people can be out recreating in the Pinelands, and there's a much more opportunity to have things like heat stroke, things like Lyme disease and West Nile virus. The warmer temperatures are better for some of the pests. If you're familiar with New Jersey, you certainly know about greenheads and mosquitoes. The other thing about southern New Jersey is with the deer population. One thing you always want to worry about are ticks and Lyme disease. And the more warmer the climate is, we think that's going to probably make those things more prevalent. Air quality, as air quality gets worse, it's respiratory. If you have asthma, there's where you're going to start to run into a lot more problems. Certainly the trees and everything can help, but as we saw before, there is a lot of pollution out there. And another thing, if you have allergies, climate change may represent a longer pollen season. So there might be more pollen out for longer. So you might have more effects from algae at different times of the year, but for longer times of the year. Back to water. Like I said, if you take anything away from this, think about the Pinelands, you want to think about water. Water resources are very important. Really the backbone of Pinelands protection is protecting water supply and water quality. So there are the two things that, right away we're going to think about. Saltwater intrusion. As sea level rise, there's a possibility that some salt water will kind of spill over into the aquifers below the surface. So that's something that we're seeing and checking, and want to try to come up with strategies to prevent. That's going to be a tough one. And then aquifer recharge. The best way I can describe the Pinelands is a gigantic water filter. So when it rains, a lot of that water is able to trickle into the ground, and that's what recharges the aquifer. So it's important to maintain those large open spaces. Now, if we get to a point where we get so much rain, the water can no longer be absorbed, then that water is going to go somewhere, and that really is going to lead into, what do you do with all this water? Water is always great, but too much water causes as many problems as not enough water, as we know. Infrastructure, buildings, roads, dams, bridges, even things like landfills and how we take care of our wastewater are all going to be affected by these changes. So we have to kind of put that into the equation as we move forward. Another impact may be managed retreat, where there are populations along the shore. Some of those towns are half on the shore, half in the Pinelands. Well, if the people from the shore need to move into the Pinelands, that's certainly going to increase the development pressure on the Pinelands. Many towns may start to lose their tax base, and all these economic realities tend to build and put more pressure on development. Other impacts, these are more specific to things like agriculture. Right away, when I think about agriculture in Pinelands, two native Pinelands plants come to mind: blueberries in the summer, and then cranberries in the fall. I was talking to a cranberry farmer the other day. And he told me he wouldn't be surprised if in 25, 30 years, they'd have a hard time growing cranberries because of the change that could be taking place. So these are things that we're aware of. It could be not all negative, though, of course. There is positive to some of this. It could be a longer growing season. So that means maybe you could grow more product. But definitely those extreme weather changes could affect things. Definitely with the water, there could be increased evaporation. And then that means there's more demands on irrigation and ultimately, crop yields. Eventually, maybe the crop yields fall too far and it's no longer economically viable to continue, cranberries and blueberries in the Pinelands. Same thing with the storms. That could cause a lot of crop damage. I had some corn I was growing this year. We had that tropical storm come by, Isis, and knock down all my corn. So that's one of those things. If you're doing that on a commercial level, that's a really serious thing you got to pay attention to. As far as the landscape and the species, the warmer the climate is, the more opportunities the forests are going to change. Habitat's going to change. A whole hours and hours I could talk about. The Pinelands is basically a fire enhanced and fire used to type ecosystem. If you take fire away or if you increase fire, you're going to start to change the Pinelands. So that's something we have to take into account with climate change. Loss of native species. Many of the Pinelands animals and plants are specialists and they are adapted specifically to our area. If we start to change the pH, we start to change the temperature, we may lose those species and other non-native species are going to move right in, and we'll see, definitely change or, migration of things that are non-native to the area. And the other thing is the more trees we have, the more carbon we're able to capture. So that's, one of those things we want to keep in place, open, free, undeveloped land for all those resources. One example we've already seen back in 2001, a pretty destructive critter came to the Pinelands. It's known as the southern pine beetle. The last time there was a strong presence in the Pinelands of the southern pine beetle was about 60 years ago. And they attack and they eat pine trees. And one of the dangers in this is the more pine trees get attacked and killed, then those pine trees change, the forest changes, and that whole balance kind of goes out. We found some ways to deal with the pine beetle. They found that if you were able to cut some of the trees around the pine beetles they're not able to find new trees and it kind of disorients them. But pine beetles went right up the Jersey coast and went over into the Long Island pine barrens. So it's definitely a tangible effect that we can see from the rise of temperature is the southern pine beetle. Some efforts, things that we are doing.
Joel,
yes.
Just put that in. We have to try to be as brief as possible because we have to.
Okay. Just real quick then, I'm going to talk about some efforts to make a difference. The Pinelands Commission has established a climate committee to specifically look at our rules and our regulations, how they can better go hand in hand with our efforts to prepare for climate change. We want to lead by example. We're going to improve our office efficiencies and have more vehicle charging capacity. The Pinelands rules were way ahead in a lot of ways, and some of our Pinelands rules from the original plan still fall in today, like the protection of forests and wetlands. We want to encourage solar going forward, but we want to encourage solar as a beneficial reuse, maybe closed landfills, maybe old sand and gravel mines. We'll always plan and protect the water. We got to maybe have some better stormwater rules to work on, and we're going to continue to protect and enhance those agricultural resources because they're very important economically for the area. And then, of course, with hotter, drier, we want to worry about fire. We want to worry about where fire comes to houses and people. So that's something that we'll be working on.
All right.
Just to wrap up, if you guys want to learn more about the Pinelands, we have a thing called the Pinelands Short Course every year. It's an education event where a lot of people come to learn about a lot of Pinelands topics. This year is going to be virtual. It's going to be on April 24th. And also, as I am the Public Programs Office, we do offer virtual programs, in-class programs, field programs. Once COVID kind of shakes out at our office, which is in Pemberton, New Jersey, we have what's called the Candace Ashman Pinelands Education Exhibit, and it's a great place for schools to come and learn about the Pinelands. And if you ever want to know about our education events and things going on, we have a Pinelands news and events email, And you can sign on to that at our website, which is right there, nj.gov/Pinelands. And there's a whole bunch of resources available to help and to, for you to learn about the Pinelands and the local area.
Thanks,
And
Joe.
with that, I'll sign off.
Well, so Joe, we have a couple questions, but you need to give like numerical answers or yes or no answers because we're running out of time.
Okay.
So one, has forest fire frequency increased in the pines as a result of climate change? Yes or no?
I
Well,
would
don't know.
say no, but there's an awful lot of pre-planned and controlled burning that goes on, which will probably be adjusted to the level of natural fire. So that
Right.
it's definitely a relationship there.
Right. And have the Pinelands farmers use an excessive amount of fertilizer? And is that leading,
No,
acidification and algal blooms?
no, and that's one of the really unique things about the Pinelands is both cranberries and blueberries are native pinelands plants, so they grow here naturally. So they don't need those unnecessary fertilizers that they would have to use to try to grow a non-native product.
Right. Awesome. All right. So we're going to move on and to the questions that weren't answered. Maybe we can come back around to them. So thank you so much, Joel. Next, we have Rhyan Grech, who is a policy advocate for the Pinelands Preservation Alliance. And so whereas Joel works for the government, a government designed to protect the Pinelands, Rhyan works for like a citizens group that also is trying to accomplish the same things, but can do some things that the government can't. And sometimes their job is to try to tell the government how they can do their jobs better, which I'm sure Joel always appreciates. So with that, I'll turn it over to Rhyan and take it away.
Thanks, Randy.
And just to know, so we're at 1:49, so be mindful of the time. Thank you.
I will. I'll move quickly here. So my name is Rhyan Grech. I'm glad to be joining you today. I'm going to talk a little bit about advocacy and some of the work we do. I work for an organization called Pinelands Preservation Alliance. Like Randy said, it's a nonprofit organization, and we focus on protecting the resources of the Pinelands National Reserve, which we just learned about in that great presentation from Joel. So Joel gave a really great history of how the Pinelands was formed. I won't repeat that. I'll just mention that back in the 1960s, the Pinelands conservation story really started with the threat of a supersonic jetport. So this was this massive airport that was going to be proposed for the middle of South Jersey, and as well as a city around the airport for 250,000 people. So it was this huge development project. So at the time, farmers, hunters, scientists, regular residents of the area, even people who didn't live in the area, who just loved the Pinelands, they loved to come and visit, teamed up to work together and push back on this project. And because of all that public pressure for about a period of about 15 years, political leaders eventually picked up this cause and successfully passed the laws to create the Pinelands National Reserve. This victory happened and the Pinelands was formed because of advocacy, which is going to be a big part of the climate solution. So that's why I'm talking about that today with you guys. I just real quick, if you want to put into the chat what you think advocacy is, if that's a word that you are familiar with. Do you have a sense of what that means? Just go ahead and type that into the chat. I'm curious to see what you guys think.
Ryan, I can narrate them for you if you want, so you can keep sharing your screen.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah.
Sure. So Kelly says to speak out on issues. Olympia says to educating the public. So some good ideas so far. Definitely, I'm sure some people are still typing, but if you want to keep going, I'll break in and let you know if there's a few more.
Great. You're definitely on the right track with those answers. Basically, what the word advocacy means is it's an action by a person or a group of people to influence a decision. So I'm going to kind of break that down for you. What it's an action that people or a group of people take, or and why is to influence a decision. So let's look at the who. Who are advocates? Basically, advocates are anybody, any age, any background, anybody who cares about an issue, cares about something. These are pictures of advocates that I've worked with. I realize now that they're all holding signs. Not all advocates have to be holding signs. That's just one way to advocate. We'll talk about more. And then who are the decision makers that advocates are trying to influence? I've just listed a few here that we have in New Jersey. We have got everybody from Governor Phil Murphy, down to the mayor of your town. Quick show of hands, if you want to just raise your hand, who knows the name of the mayor of your town? You don't have to tell me what the name is, but if you know your town's mayor, just raise your hand real quick. So for those who don't, do me a favor, when you get home today, look up the name of the mayor of your town. It's a good person to know. And then also agencies are decision makers. We heard earlier from Helaine from the Department of Environmental Protection, from Joel from the Pinelands Commission. Those are both state agencies, and they make a lot of decisions about things that happen in New Jersey. When and where to advocate. Basically, some things to think about. When and where will a large number of decision makers be gathered? Some places like your township council have regular meetings. The Pinelands Commission has monthly meetings. That means everybody's in the same place at the same time. That's a great time to advocate. And these meetings are also very useful because there's an opportunity for public comment built right into the agenda. So part of the meeting, the microphone is kind of turned over to the public for an opportunity to make public comment. When will the public comment period take place? During an application. So basically, if someone wants to build a project, build something in your neighborhood, they need to usually apply to the town, maybe apply to the DEP or the Pinelands Commission. And part of that application process will give a specific amount of time. It might be days or weeks or even months to make public comment. So if you know when that is, you can call or email the agency from home. You don't necessarily have to attend these meetings or be in a big rally, a group of people. You can do this advocacy comfortably from your couch in a lot of cases. So how to advocate? We talked a little bit about spoken comment, the public comment periods at meetings, at rallies. If you are speaking in front of a group, a lot of times it's very helpful to have your comments kind of written up beforehand. Sometimes it's nerve-wracking to speak in front of a big group of people. So if you have something written out, written comment or phone calls during your appropriate time frame for public comment. And advocacy, you can make it fun. Many of the rallies have instruments, singing, dancing. You can organize a sign making party, invite friends over, share craft supplies, and make signs that we saw from some of those pictures. You can organize a letter writing party, have folks over, have some snacks, write some letters to your elected officials. Advocacy is serious because you're working on something that you care about, but because advocacy is most effective with a lot of people, it can also be a lot of fun. So this should give you an idea about how advocacy is done. If friends of yours feel the same way, invite them to come with you to meetings to speak, invite family members. This is called organizing. You can do it to get a bunch of people to write emails on the same day or make phone calls on the same day. You guys, this actually works. Not every time, sometimes they'll still make a decision that you don't agree with, but people, especially big groups of people, have the power to change the minds of decision makers. And just like all those people who organized and advocated to protect the Pinelands, eventually convinced the decision makers to actually pass laws, you can also make that kind of difference. So I want you to keep that in mind during this climate summit. Anytime you hear about or think of an idea that you think might work to help slow down climate change or help your community prepare for it, remember advocacy and organizing. Think about how you can try to convince decision makers to take on some of your ideas. So specifically with climate change, Joel covered this really well, but this is a map from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, another one of those agencies we talked about, that shows some of the high risk areas. And you'll notice that it corresponds with water along the coast, some of these rivers and streams that come inland. And it's because, as Joel mentioned, saltwater intrusion, sea level rise, water quality concerns. These red, orange, and yellow areas are not the only spots in South Jersey that will be impacted by climate change, but they might be some of the first. So because of that, I'm just going to talk a little bit more about water. So a big issue for towns in the near future is going to be stormwater management. Joel touched on this as well. So stormwater runoff is, basically when it rains, the rainwater runs off of roofs, streets, sidewalks. It picks up oil from cars, it picks up trash, fertilizers from lawns, and then there's all this polluted water with nowhere to go. So basically, as climate impacts increase and major weather events increase, we're going to have a bigger challenge of how to deal with stormwater runoff. Where's it going to go? How do we clean it before we can use it again? So
Ryan, you just have about another, I apologize, but the teachers and students are usually on a pretty tight schedule, so we're running up on 2. So, and I have
okay.
closing statement also. So,
okay, I will wrap it up. So basically, the towns, because of some changes at the DEP level and the Pinelands Commission, the towns are going to have to adopt new rules about stormwater. So this is a great opportunity right now for people to get involved at the township level. And one suggestion is non-structural requirements. This is a fancy way to say, let's protect the trees and the plants that are already there to suck up some of the rainwater. Basically, an adult oak tree can take up about 100 gallons of water a day, a mature oak tree. So these are great resources that we should be protecting in the face of climate change. Rain gardens, my coworker, Isabella Castiglione, is actually going to be doing a really in-depth presentation about rain gardens in a couple of weeks. So I encourage you guys to tune into that. So a couple of upcoming opportunities if you're interested. The Pinelands Commission meetings are usually during the week at 9:30. So that would have to be, during school hours, school project. But most township meetings are during the evenings. And so I encourage you to sit in on a meeting. They're usually virtual at this point, and you can see how the public comment section goes. You can present a new idea at these meetings. Check to see if your town has an environmental commission. And PPA has a program called a landscape makeover program. This basically allows you to make your own rain garden, either at a community area or in your yard. And you might even qualify for a rebate. So we've got upcoming webinars on March 4th and 18th about those. You can contact me and I can send you that information if you're interested. Again, my coworker is going to do another session about that later on. Real quick, PPA has an action network. This is a group of advocacy volunteers. All ages are welcome. If you're interested in diving more into advocacy to protect the pines, contact me and let me know. And that's it. Here's my contact information. I encourage anybody to reach out with any questions for more information.
That's so awesome, Ryan. Thank you. And one of the advantages of being a student is your advocacy is particularly effective. Don't ask me why, but adults who sit on boards and commissions and in the government are particularly responsive to students. So with that, I just want to wrap up and thank everyone for being here. I want to thank our partners, the Drumthwacket Foundation and Atlantic City Electric and the Exelon Foundation, who made this event possible and really germinated the idea. I also want to remind people about the upcoming sessions. And so I'm not going to read them all off, but this is all on the website, and you should have received a lot of these materials. So we've got some tremendous sessions coming up. And then also for the teachers, we have a number of professional development sessions on really how to teach climate change. We hope you participate in those. And finally, don't forget to start thinking about your projects, because that is where the fun part is. You can actually go do something. You can advocate, you can do a rain garden, you can contact Joel or Ryan or any of the other speakers that you hear. You can go to Sustainable Jersey for Schools. You can see the things that your schools could be doing, and you can advocate to your school to do them or actually do some of those projects yourself. So, the bottom line, let's do something, and let's do it together. So thank you all so much. And we'll be in touch. Take care.